Morning, everyone.
Morning.
How are you today?
Great.
Good. I'm okay too. So, yes, what are we doing? Right, this is the part of the service where we read the Bible. And how am I doing so far? I'm really crap at this job. And it often strikes me that to read the Bible involves a fair degree of tension. On the one hand, we're Christians, so to us the Bible is a special book, a book that gives us guidance, comfort and reproof. However, on the other hand, we have bills to pay, deadlines to meet, children to parent, spouses to love, and when we bring our modern problems to an ancient text, it's sometimes difficult to get what the one says to the other, to figure out what these old stories mean in a modern day life. And I say that because I want you to know that I know how hard it is sometimes to bridge the gap between the world of the Bible and the world in which we actually live, work and play. So having said that then, let's take some tentative steps across that bridge and carry on working our way through a really interesting part of the Bible called the second book of the Kings. And this morning we're in chapter 5 and verse 1, which introduces us to a character called Naaman, whom we are told was a commander of the army of the king of Aram. Then we're further told that this individual was a great man, great that is in the sight of his master. Not only was he great, he was also highly regarded, so plenty of respect and prestige in his world. And then we're further told that the reason for his greatness and prestige was because through him the Lord had given victory to Aram. Then we're told he was a valiant soldier, but he had leprosy. Now, what's interesting to me about this introduction is that to the original readers of the story, the hero is an enemy. So you'll notice that he comes from a place called Aram, and Aram is a country with whom these people are perpetually in conflict. And you'll further notice that not only does this man come from Aram, but he is a senior soldier in the Aramite army. So what this means, obviously, is that this individual, the hero of this morning's story, has personally supervised the subjugation of the Jewish people for whom this story was written. By his hand and by his genius, many people in Israel have suffered and died. And what's particularly troubling, I think, is that the Bible attributes the success of this bad man to a good God, the one we try to pray to every day. Now, the reason for this is that in the worldview of the Bible, there is only one God, and that therefore means that everything, both good and bad, ultimately comes from him. This is why in the Old Testament, for example, Satan is sometimes described in a way that it almost seems like he's working for God, like he's doing things on God's behalf. Now, we'd say more than this. We'd say that the success of this bad man is a combination of luck and industry and opportunity. So we'd buy into the Malcolm Gladwell thesis. We'd say that he was born into a period of history where soldiering was a great career. That was his opportunity. We'd then say that to his opportunity he added hard work and industry. He put in his 10,000 hours and eventually he made it. However, just like you and just like me, he had a thing. A thing. A thing that spoiled all the other things in his life. His thing, as you can see, was that he had leprosy. And maybe it's because I'm weird, but I love the complication of this detail. I love that there's this great person who's achieved great things, who has something in his life that makes his life less than great. The man who's made it to the very top has issues going on that makes life at the top not all that enjoyable. I think this is something that we can all relate to. because the many, many things that are good about our life, and there are surely many, are almost always spoiled by the few things that are not so good about our life. And the fact is, it can be hard to enjoy all of your success when there's something that takes your focus on, that takes your eye off your success on a daily basis. Now, when the Bible talks about a person having leprosy, it just means some kind of skin disease. So anything that would today concern a dermatologist would then be called leprosy. So this man has got some kind of serious skin condition. And in the ancient world, having a skin condition was a problem that was both physical and emotional. Perhaps, in fact, more emotional than physical. Emotional because having a skin condition was believed to be a symptom of immorality. So if you lived 3,000 years ago and you got spots or you got eczema, people would have naturally assumed that you'd been up to something that you shouldn't have, and the gods were punishing you. This is why people who had leprosy were said to be unclean. Very good. And so given that stigma, we might assume that this problem is embarrassing for both Naaman and his family. After all, how is it possible for a person who has such prominence and stature, who holds such authority and rank in society, to suffer from such a disease, from such an issue, from such embarrassment? It seems like an anomaly. And I think it's a sort of anomaly that we all live with at some point in our lives. You, for example, you who in many ways hold to such a decent morality, you who in many ways have such class and refinement. I suppose that only applies to a few of you. You who have achieved so much and who've won so much, you who believe so many good beliefs, you struggle with what? You have that issue? You have that thing going on in your life? How can that be? It doesn't make sense. This is the tension of life that we must accept. Take Winston Churchill, for example. By any measure, a great man, loved and admired the world over. To talk about his achievements would eat up the rest of our time this morning, so I won't. And yet, for all his greatness and all his achievements, he suffered from depression, bad depression. He felt at the end that his whole life had been a failure, that all that he'd worked so hard to get was a waste of time, and that he'd spent his days on nothing. Things are rarely simple in this life, and to wish that they were is to wish for fairy tales and to ignore the glorious, dirty reality of the only life that we get. So anyway, I like this. The great man had a great weakness, a great problem. Then we're told, in the next sentence, that bands of raiders from Aram, so more enemies, more bad people, had gone out and taken captive a young girl from Israel, and she served Naaman's wife. So what we're talking about in this sentence is nothing less than child trafficking. And child trafficking is always difficult to read about, whether in a modern newspaper or an ancient text. But it is all the more difficult, I think, here because of the tension between verse 1 and verse 2. In verse 1, the subtle point is that the pagan Naaman, who follows pagan gods and does pagan nasty things, is given all of his success in life from God. God gave this bad person good things. That's the point. And so then in the next sentence, we might further assume that this good believing girl from a good believing family in Israel gets kidnapped and trafficked at the hand of that same God, the one we try to pray to. You can't have it both ways, I'm afraid. You can't credit God for the good things in life and not blame him for the bad things. You can't, on the one hand, say that God is amazing because he created the hummingbird, which is beautiful to look at, and not also say that God is strange and slightly difficult to understand because he created the loa worm that causes blindness in young children. Both are true. Both are difficult. However this Game of Thrones is played, it seems it is rarely played in a way that is palatable to our sensibilities. And so we go on to read that this innocent victim of child trafficking is somehow a pawn in the hands of a higher power. And then we read that while she was in servitude to her kidnappers, she said to her mistress, her kidnapper, the one who held her in captivity, "If only my master would see the prophet who is in Samaria, he would cure him of his leprosy." Now notice this. Notice that the captive doesn't allow her captivity to make her bitter or unhelpful. I think it's often the case in life, more often than we tell ourselves actually, that we're not able to choose our circumstances. Stuff happens, we didn't choose it, it just happens. But it is always the case, I think, that we are able to choose how we behave within those circumstances. No matter how bad things get, and I know they get very bad sometimes, we always reserve the capacity and the right to do good and to make good choices. And so this young, unnamed girl stands in a long line of biblical characters who try and seek the goods of those who have wronged them, who try to improve the lives of those who have so spoiled their own. And so she says, "Hey, no offense, but I couldn't help notice that you've got flaky skin. I've been vacuuming it up all morning. And I just want you to know that, oh, now I'm thinking of an old priest I knew. Flaky skin and black outfits don't work, do they? Sorry, please don't be watching this on YouTube. Do priests watch YouTube? I don't know, they probably do. So she says, there's this guy in my home country, Israel, whose people you have killed and subjugated and impoverished, who's able to help you with this flaky skin condition that you've got. And how nice is this of the young slave, stepping out of the text for a moment and into our lives. What harm would it do us to be good employees to bad employers? I mean, if your boss is horrible to you, and you're horrible back, does that help you? Does it improve the situation? If someone else is being an idiot, does your idiocy improve the situation? I know it feels good. I really do know that. It feels really good. But does it help? Back to the story. So Naaman went to his master and told him what the girl from Israel had said. And no doubt he's quite excited about this. After all, when you're desperate, you'll try anything and everything. And so having told his boss, the pagan king of Aram, about this guy in Israel who can help with leprosy, the king then says, "Go for it. I will send you a letter to the king of Israel." That'll help, I suppose. I'll write a letter. That's what kings do. So Naaman left, taking with him 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, and 10 sets of clothing. The letter he took to the king of Israel read, "With this letter I am sending my servant Naaman to you, so that you may cure him of his leprosy." Now, the sums of money in this sentence are astronomical. 10 talents is an amount of weight that approximates to 340 kilos in our system, and 6,000 shekels approximates to about 90 kilos of weight in our silver. So 340 kilos of silver and 90 kilos of gold is by any measure plenty of money. And I'm sure some of you will waste the next 5 minutes of my talk finding out exactly what's that's worth on your iPad or smartphone. Certainly millions. So Naaman the general, the rich man, the man who's made it to the top, heads off with a large entourage, takes his letter, takes his cash, crosses the border into Israel, a country he has subjugated many times, and he goes to the king of Israel. And then we're told that as soon as the king of Israel read the letter, he tore his robes and said, "Am I God? Can I kill and bring back to life?" It seemed to me that would be a fun thing to be able to do, because then you could enjoy the pleasure of killing someone more than once. Please. Why does this fellow send someone to me to be cured of leprosy? He's trying to pick a fight with me, and you can understand why he would think that. This is like what happens when your boss changes the conditions of your work in such a way that it's now impossible for you to fulfill those conditions. It sounds like he's been set up for failure here, so he's very nervous. This is how he feels. Then we're told that when Elisha, the man of God, heard that the king of Israel had torn his robes, he sent him this message: "Why have you torn your robes? Have the man come to me." Worth mentioning, I think, that in Jewish culture, the action of tearing your clothes is, among other things, a sign of despair. And when you're showing signs of despair, it's always good to hear a person say, especially a person from the outside, a person who has some objectivity, "Why are you showing signs of despair?" Now, the reason that's good is because I think that when things get bad, as they often do, as they inevitably do, hope is often the first casualty. We've all had experiences like this in life, and if we haven't, one day we will. Things get bad, and the badness becomes a fog around your mind, and that fog is so thick that you can't see your way out of it. And so you persuade yourself that the only option open to you is despair, right? Because when things become difficult, those difficulties are very adept at persuading you that they are here to stay, that they are here forever, that the sun will never shine on you again. And of course, that is rarely the case. Despair, I think, is never a good idea. Things are never quite as bad as they seem. And even if things are as bad as they seem, despair probably isn't a good plan. Probably doesn't help. Anyway, so the prophet says, "Cheer yourself up, send flaky face to me." So Naaman went. I know, but you just say, in case anyone thinks I'm being cruel, and someone probably will, I know firsthand how crippling this problem is. When I was in my teenage years, and it seems to me as cruel that life, at a point where you're most sensitive and most vulnerable, chooses to do the most cruel things to your body. Have you noticed this? When I was in high school, I had the worst acne in the world. I looked like I'd been, I don't know, had some alien disease or something. And it was, I couldn't get a dog to bark at me, much less a girl. And it was just so I get how horrible this is. So please don't think I'm being cruel. I think I got out of that quite well. So anyway, Naaman goes with his chariots and his horses, and he stops at the door of Elisha's house. Now, we know from other parts of the Bible that this prophet is one of those people in life for whom money and houses and cars and all that just didn't bother him. He didn't swing that way. Not that there's anything wrong with those things, he just wasn't all that interested. So his house would have been a very, very ordinary home. Very ordinary. So imagine the scene. Sweeping up to this very ordinary home is a convoy of fancy people in fancy vehicles, a bit like this image here in the slide. This photo was taken in Martha's Vineyard, and it's a photo of President Obama paying a visit to one of his friends. This is him going for a coffee. And it's kind of impressive, and it's kind of intimidating, and intentionally so. It's designed, among other things, to convey an image of power and strength and prestige. And I mentioned that to you because of what happens next. The rich convoy of vehicles arrives. The motorcade comes to a stop. The powerful general with his millions of dollars of silver and gold gets out, knocks on the door. Elisha doesn't go and see him. Doesn't even get off the old sofa he bought off someone on Kijiji. He's busy eating last night's pizza and SpaghettiOs. He doesn't get off the sofa. Doesn't look the guy in the eye. Instead, he sends out a messenger. And the message is, go wash yourself 7 times in the Jordan, and your flesh will be restored, and you will be cleansed. Cleansed, remember, leprosy was thought to be a punishment for immorality, and for that reason, lepers had to wash regularly, not for reasons of hygiene, but for reasons of religion. And that's the sort of washing that's in mind here. So this would be like my saying to you, I know you've got problems. Why don't you go to confession? You'll feel better. Go into the box, do your thing, say your Hail Marys and your Our Fathers, or whatever it is you do, and that's it. That's all you got to do. And when he hears this, Naaman goes away angry. And he says, you know, I travelled all this way with all these horses and all these limousines and all this gold and all this silver, and I went up to this guy's house. I had a letter written from one king to another king, and the other king sent me to this ordinary little crappy home. The guy doesn't even get off his sofa to see me. I thought he would surely come out of his house to meet me. I thought he would surely do his juju, right? I thought he'd wave his hand, and I thought I'd be cured on the spot. I thought the whole thing would work, right? I came to the place of God with certain expectations, and my expectations have not been met. And again, this is something that you and I can relate to readily, more readily than we admit. To read and to believe the stories of the Bible, and to live with the complications of this life, is to often feel that our faith fails to meet the expectations that we have of it. And so when, instead of getting what he expects, he's asked instead to go and wash in the Jordan, he asks, and asks rightly, are not Abana and Pharpar, the rivers of Damascus, better than all the waters of Israel? Couldn't I have gone and washed in them and be cleansed? And the answer to that question is a resounding yes. The 2 rivers that he mentions here are spoken of in ancient texts as being places of paradise. Their beauty and their tranquility were renowned in the ancient world. And so his view here is, there are solutions in the world I came from that are far better and make far more sense to me than the silly solution I'm being offered in this place of faith. And that's just an honest statement. I think it's always the case to say that the pleasures to which I am addicted offer me a joy that is far more real and far more tangible than the joy that I read of in the Bible. That the securities that I'm working so hard to acquire and to preserve offer me far more safety than the God I cannot see. That the laws of the jungle and of the city and of the market make far more sense to me than the laws of the Bible. And so he is annoyed that he sold a false bill of goods. And in his annoyance, we read that he turns away in a rage. The word turned, of course, is a loaded word in the Bible. In this context, it means that he was open to kicking the tires of faith, as we are. He was open to learning more about this God thing. But now he's turned off by it. He walks away. However, as he does so, Naaman's servants went to him and said, "My father, if the prophet had told you to do some great thing, would you not have done it? If you'd been asked to do something weird or strange or elaborate, you'd have done that in a heartbeat." I think I told you before the story of the witch's curse and the dead chicken. Did I tell you that story before? No. I suppose you want me to now. Yeah. About a year, I suppose 2 years ago, Pastor Sammy and I were working with a person who felt that earlier in his life had been cursed with bad luck. And he further felt that that curse had caused him to continually make bad decisions. Now, think of that what you will. Doesn't matter. What matters is that he believed that. And because he believed it so sincerely, it affected his life negatively. And so he sought help. Before coming to see us, he'd gone to see another person. And what that person had said was, okay, here's what you got to do to lift the curse. You got to kill a chicken, and then you got to draw a circle with the chicken's blood around yourself, and then you got to pay me $5,000, and that'll do the trick for you. And he did that gladly. Killed the chicken gladly. Probably had it coming. Drew the circle of blood gladly. Paid the $5,000 gladly. That he was willing to do. Freaky as it was, he was willing to do. The advice he got from us was less spectacular. We said, well, if you're concerned about continually making bad decisions in life, then why don't you start making good decisions in life and believe that you can? Be confident that you don't have bad luck. Be confident that you can make better choices. Right? The best way to overcome a series of bad decisions is to start making a series of good decisions. However, as simple and as free as that advice was, it was so simple and so free that it was to him slightly, I think, suspicious and substandard, almost unbelievable. This is the problem Naaman is having. If he'd asked me to do something outlandish and weird and expensive, I'd have done it. But you're asking me to do something simple. It makes no sense. However, his servants, I suppose, used to being treated like idiots, prevail upon him to do as he was asked. So, we're told he went down and dipped himself in the Jordan 7 times, as he had been told. Then we read his flesh was restored and became clean like that of a young boy. Sounds like he found the fountain of eternal youth, or as they call it in Hollywood, Botox. Not just Hollywood now, actually. Then, happy music. Naaman and all his attendants went back to the man of God. He stood before him and said, so he got off his sofa this time. Maybe he didn't like it looking at people with skin conditions before. Maybe that was his issue. I don't know. And he says, remarkably, now I know that there is no God in all the world except in Israel. So please accept a gift from your servant. So this is one of the great, I think the great pagan conversion stories in the Old Testament. And in it we see something of what conversion is. It is to have a change of mind about something, and then to have a subsequent change in the way your life is arranged and organized. So this person says, I used to live in a pagan country and follow pagan gods and do pagan things. Now my mind has changed about who God is, and because my mind has changed about that, I'm going to do things slightly differently. And as a conversion story, it's actually quite pointed, because it's written at a period in history when most people in Israel were practical pagans, in the same way that we are practical atheists. Drink. Practical atheists, what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is that we all believe in God, for sure, but we behave as though there wasn't a God. So we act as though God did not see, we worry as though God did not care, we treat people as though they were not made in God's image. And what seems to have so impressed this new convert is that the God of Israel, the God he's just discovered, seems to be alive. He seems to be open and engaged in the world. This is, of course, the great theme of the Old Testament. Our God lives. He acts. He does stuff. He feels. He gets sad. He gets angry. He is passionate. He is alive. He is in love. He is jealous, etc., etc. Then some interesting details. The rich man, who, remember, has brought with him all that silver and all that gold, says to the prophet who has nothing, who sits on an old sofa eating last night's pizza, "Can I give you something? Like, I got all this silver over here and all this gold. Please let me give you something. Like, do you need any gold? How about $5,000? Any chickens you want me to kill? Like, anything. What do you want?" And the prophet says, "As surely as the Lord lives, whom I serve, I will not accept a thing." To which we all say, "No. Dude, he's begging you. He brought the money. He wants to give it to you. He's forcing it into your pocket. Take it." "No, I won't." His point seems to be, we know this from later in the story, I won't read to you, "I serve a God of the defeated. A God of those who have lost in life. A God of those for whom life doesn't work all that well all the time. That's my God. And the interesting thing about my God is that he really doesn't care about the stuff that you care about. So I know that all that silver is just so impressive to you, but God doesn't care, and so I don't care. And I know that all that gold at $1,200 an ounce or whatever it is, I mean, it's gold. It's so important. My God doesn't care, and so I don't care. I'm just not into it. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it, I just don't swing that way." Then Naaman makes an odd request. He says, "Please let me, your servant, be given as much earth as a pair of mules can carry. For your servant will never again make burnt offerings and sacrifices to any god but the Lord." So he wants to take some soil from Israel, take it home and probably, I don't know, make an altar out of it or something, or just remind himself of this experience he's just had. This is something we still do today. For example, I have in my home a piece of the Great Wall of China. I know that's really wrong to do. It's a World Heritage Site. I was young at the time, but I was there and I thought, I'm having some of that. So that I could tell a story about it in church one day. And so I broke a bit off and I took it home. I have a rock in my garden from Scotland. It's just to remind me of who I am. And, you know, it's a thing, right? It's a thing. Then he says, pay attention to this. This is fascinating. This is in the Bible. The Bible that is far grayer than its white page and black words would suggest. "But may the Lord forgive your servant this one thing. So I'm going to sin and I want forgiveness in advance." Great. There's no way God's going to swing that way, right? Right? Like, whatever he says next is not going to fly. "When I go home to my pagan country with its pagan gods and its pagan temples, when my master enters the temple of Rimmon to bow down, and he is leaning on my arm, and I have to bow there also, when I bow down in the temple of Rimmon, may the Lord forgive your servant for this." Now we're thinking, no way. But Elisha says, It's okay. Go in peace. Rimmon, god from Babylon, very popular in Syria. I think we have a photo of him or a drawing or something. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Ooh.
Didn't have it on the sheet.
Yeah, that's it. Thank you. So this is Rimmon. Solar panels on his dress. God of thunder, I think. God of... They all seem to be gods of thunder in the Near East. But anyway, he was a god of thunder and a god of storm. And he was the main god in Syria, where this character comes from. And so, here's what he's saying. I have to go home now to a pagan country where the main god is this character Rimmon. And in the capital city where I am an important person who holds authority and rank and prestige, there are just sometimes I have to go to this temple. And I have to bow before this god. There are times of the year, there are ceremonies where I have to participate in the worship of this pagan, nasty deity in whose name I have done pagan, nasty things. And I want to know in advance that when I do that, it's okay with the God of the Bible, the God in whom I now believe. And the answer is yes. Apparently it is. So this is an interesting verse from the perspective of I'm out of town on business and there are things that are expected of me that I don't like. What do I do? Sometimes it would seem it's okay to go through the motions. Sometimes it's okay to participate in the ceremonies and the activities, etc., that we would rather not. Right? The world is complex. And following God in the complexity is often grey. It's not grey if you're a monk, but you're not a monk. It's not grey if you're a nun, but you're not a nun. Sometimes our private faith isn't integrated all that easily into our public life. And what I like about this strange detail is that God seems to understand and be okay with it. God, it seems, sometimes is not as black and white as we would paint him to be. We'll have questions in a minute, but before we do, I would sum up and say that the story of Naaman's healing is a story of a faith that is easy to have because it's free to get. But it's difficult to believe because it's free to get. And the answers that faith offers are sometimes hard to swallow because there are far more tangible and convincing answers to be found elsewhere. And once that faith is grasped, the new life into which it then emerges is difficult. The post-leprosy existence of this person was a challenge. It will mean siding with the God of the defeated and the subjugated, the God who doesn't care about gold and silver, and siding with that God and following that God in a pagan place whilst bowing before a pagan statue that you don't believe in and holding those things in tension. Very difficult, very complex. But that's our task. Any questions? Yes, the Hitler thing. But the problem is worse in the Old Testament than it is in the New Testament. The Old Testament is really strict on the issue of there's just one God. And if you're really strict on the issue of there is just one God and that God is in charge of everything, then that inevitably takes you to a place where everything that happens because either that one God causes it to happen or allows it to happen. So that's the theology of the Old Testament. I don't think it's necessarily the theology that plays right throughout the whole of the Bible. I don't think it's a theology that we would necessarily ascribe to totally today. I think our belief would be more complex. So we would say something like, bad things happen in life. That's the statement, that's a fact. Bad things happen. And as soon as you accept that bad things happen, you then have to ask, well, why do bad things happen? Well, there are possibilities. Sometimes bad things happen because we are silly. and we do bad things. We make bad choices. One has to say that there's evil in the world because of things that we as humans do, choices that we as humans make. That would seem to be an observable fact. Getting beyond observable facts, we would then say, well, perhaps there's evil in the world and perhaps bad things happen because of what's going on in the supernatural world. So at this point we'd knock on the door of the devil and say, is something going on there? The New Testament would attribute a greater degree of autonomy to him than the Old Testament. So the New Testament would say things like, careful, because the devil's out to screw with you. And then more mysteriously, we would say, well, perhaps bad things happen in life because God permits it. I'm drawn to that line in the Old Testament that says, this person is in a terrible situation, and he says to the people who put him there, you planned this for my evil, but the Lord meant it for good. Something good came out of this. So I realize it's an ugly thing to say, but sometimes bad things happen in life because of what we believe about God. Take an earthquake, for example. Every time there's an earthquake and people die, theologically, that raises questions about God. The world in which we live needs tectonic plates. No tectonic plates that move, no life on this biosphere. So, why was the world designed that way? I don't know. It's a bizarre question, but sometimes God, sometimes the devil, sometimes our stupidity, sometimes other people's stupidity. Usually other people's stupidity. It's a good question. Any other questions? Okay, great. 11:40. Let's pray. Let's pray that nothing bad happens to any of us this week. How about that? That be all right?
Yeah.
Okay. Father in heaven, we believe that you're a God who cares for us. And we believe that your care has teeth, that it has muscles, that it has eyes, that it has ears. And so we ask of you, please, that this week you will protect us all, that you will guard our minds, that you will guard our emotions, that you will guard our behaviour, that you will guard us from the misbehaviour of others. Keep us from harm, keep us from calamity, and lead us ever towards joy and happiness and safety. We ask this in Christ's name.